Hello, my name is Karen Stathoplos, and today I'm going to be reading you a Christmas story by Pearl S. Buck, who lived in China for a lot of her life. This is not a story from China, but she wrote many Christmas stories. This is from Once Upon a Christmas. And I particularly love this story because I first read it when I was a little girl. We had lots of books in my house, which is probably not a surprise to anybody who's heard me read stories, but my father was a school teacher who earned like $3,000 a year. I don't even know how my mom got us books, but sometimes she couldn't actually buy the book, and she would see a story in a magazine and cut it out and put it in construction paper. And this story, The Christmas Ghost, is one of the stories she did that to. So when I found it in this large collection by Pearl S. Buck, I just shrieked. I was at somebody else's house, and the woman, a friend of my mother's, nicely said, "Karen, take that book," because I was so excited to see The Christmas Ghost. So here we go. The Christmas Ghost by Pearl S. Buck. "Where should we put the big star?" Jimpsy asked. Jimpsy was 6 years old. His real name was James Collingswood Brown, but he was called Jimpsy because his mother had said one day when she was trying to button his coat, "Oh, please stand still, Jimmy. You're such a Jimpsy-jumpsy little boy." And from that day on, he was Jimpsy. The star was almost as tall as he was. "Let's have a big star," his mother had said last week. "A big star to celebrate this first Christmas in our own home." The house was one they had chosen together, a farmhouse set in meadows, and they moved there in the autumn when the trees were red and gold, and already it was home. They had lived in the city before they found this house, but Jimpsy's father said a boy should grow up in the country where there was plenty of room, and that was why they were here instead of there. Now it was Christmas Eve, and Jimpsy's father had just finished the star. It was made of 5 crossed pieces of wood, and on each piece of wood he had fastened electric lights. They stood around to admire it, Jimpsy, his father, his mother, and Mr. Higgins, the hired man. Mr. Higgins was old and bent over, but he had been Jimpsy's best friend ever since they had moved into the house in the country. "Yes, it's such a big star. Where shall we put it?" Jimpsy's mother asked. "Let's think," Jimpsy's father said. "Put it at the top of the big sycamore tree there by the front door," Mr. Higgins said. "Then the lights will shine clear down to the bridge." "A good idea," Jimpsy's father said. "That's what we'll do." The house stood on a hill, and at the bottom of the hill was a brook, and across the brook was a bridge. Jimpsy could see the bridge very easily now as he jumped around the tree. It had 3 arches, and it was made of stone. A pretty bridge, his mother said, and it was another reason she had wanted to buy this particular house. Meanwhile, the star was going up. First, Mr. Higgins tied a rope around the middle of the star. Then he fetched a ladder, set it against the tree. Then he climbed up into the tree, and Jimpsy's father lifted the star, and Mr. Higgins pulled until the star was high among the branches facing the bridge. "Beautiful," Jimpsy's mother said. Mr. Higgins tied the star fast to a branch, and then he climbed down carefully because he was quite old. And Jimpsy's father went into the house to attach the electric cord. In a moment, the star was shining, and they all clapped their hands, and Jimpsy's mother sang, "Oh, little star of Bethlehem." "Except this is a big star," Jimpsy said when she had finished. "Quite right," his father said. "And now I must go about some Christmas business of my own." "So must I," Jimpsy's mother said. That left just Jimpsy and Mr. Higgins, and as usual, they began to talk. Well, that is, Mr. Higgins began to talk, and Jimpsy listened. Mr. Higgins loved to talk, and Jimpsy liked to hear him, so everything was all right. Mr. Higgins began. "You see that big barn, Jimpsy?" "I see it," Jimpsy said. It was easy to see, for there it stood, not far from the house, a huge red barn with a slanting roof. It was made of stone and wood, and inside the big doors were piles of hay and straw. "You see the bridge?" Mr. Higgins asked. "I see the bridge," Jimpsy said. He couldn't see it too well now, for the sun was beginning to set and a faint mist was rising from the brook. Still, he could see the 3 arches and the curve over the water. "Well, Did you know a ghost walks betwixt the barn and the bridge at midnight every Christmas Eve? A ghost? Jimsy repeated in a small voice. A ghost, Mr. Higgins said firmly. It's the ghost of my old friend, Timothy Stillwagon, who died several years ago, come this day after Christmas. Why does his ghost stay in our barn? Jimsy asked. He wasn't sure he liked the idea of a ghost, especially on Christmas Eve, and in his barn. Oh, it wasn't your barn in those days, Mr. Higgins said. It was the barn of Timothy Stillwagon himself. He was the farmer here, and he lived in this house, and he kept his cows in the barn, and every Christmas Eve the two of us would walk together from the barn down to the bridge, at midnight, mind you, after he'd trimmed the tree for his children, and I'd trimmed the tree for my children. Well, we'd walk up the hill to see his tree, and he'd walk back with me to see my tree, because my house is there by the bridge. It was true that Mr. Higgins' house was there by the bridge. It was a small house set in a small, neat garden. Why did you walk to see your trees? Jimsy asked. Because, Mr. Higgins said, whichever the two of us had the finer tree, the other was supposed to buy him a cup of hot coffee at the village diner. Did you have the best tree, Mr. Higgins? Jimsy asked. Mr. Higgins laughed in big chuckles. Neither one nor the other of us ever got that cup of coffee on account. We always thought the other had the prettier tree. The end of that was we'd walk back and forth betwixt the barn and the bridge, arguing about it, until we could walk no more on account of the cold. And you'll be getting cold too, Jimsy, just standing here listening to me talk about it. So go into the house before your mother calls you in. Good night, Mr. Higgins. I wish you a Merry Christmas. The same to you, Jimsy, Mr. Higgins said. And it will be a Merry Christmas for me because you are here. My own children are grown up and gone away. My old wife is dead, and I'm alone yonder in that little house of mine by the bridge, and I've been there for many a year. But this Christmas, bless you, when I look up here, I won't see a dark house. I will see a warm house with a family in it, and you the child, and the big star shining above it. Oh, Timothy Stillwagon and I will have something to talk about at last. Jimsy was surprised. You mean you still talk to him? Oh, sure, Mr. Higgins said cheerfully. Him and me, we walk the road together just as we always did on Christmas Eve, me and my flesh and bones, and he and his ghost. Jimsy heard this, and he was not at all sure he liked the idea of a ghost walking this very night of Christmas Eve. He went into the house and shut the door very tightly and ran to find his mother. She was in the living room tying silver balls on the Christmas tree. Mother, he said in a little voice, I'm here. She turned around surprised. Why, Jimsy, she said, you look white. Are you cold? No, it's just that Mr. Higgins says we have a ghost. Do we? She said. Well, now, who is he? He's a man who used to live here, Mr. Higgins says, but now he's a ghost. His mother laughed. Oh, that Mr. Higgins. He does talk so much. Don't you believe him, Mother? Not when he talks about ghosts, she said, and tied another silver ball on the tree. At this moment, from upstairs, Jimsy heard his father singing a Christmas carol. It was his favorite, a cheerful one, the one about decking halls with boughs of holly, and Jimsy ran upstairs. Daddy, he said all out of breath, did you know we have a ghost? His father was tying a red ribbon around a very small box wrapped in silver paper. Tell me about it, he said. Jimsy began all over again. It's the ghost of Mr. Timothy Stillwagon. He lived in this house, him and his children. He and his children, his father said, and I'm sure they had a happy life, and bless his ghost. And don't tell your mother you saw me wrapping this very small package, because it's for her, and inside it is a beautiful gold bracelet made just for her. I won't tell. Jimsy stood watching his father tie a big bow on the small box. Are you afraid of ghosts, Daddy? He asked after a while. Well, his father said, I've never seen one. It's silly to be afraid of something you've never seen. Fact is, Jimsy, I don't even believe in ghosts. Mr. Higgins does. Well, he's a a lonely, oldish man, and maybe he dreams of ghosts to keep him company. And speaking of company, let's go downstairs and see if your mother needs help with the tree." They went downstairs together, and what with one thing and another, eating supper by the fire and having his bath and hanging up his stocking by the chimney, Jimsy went to sleep thinking about Santa Claus instead of Timothy Stillwagon. "Go to sleep right away," his mother said when she tucked him into bed. "Santa Claus has a lot to do for you tonight," his father said, kissing him good night. How long he slept, Jimsy did not know. When he woke up, the house was very quiet. So quiet that he thought he would get up and see why it was quiet. He put on his slippers and his warm red bathrobe and went to the window. The big star was still shining so that Santa Claus could find his way, and shining so brightly that Jimsy could almost see the bridge. Then, suddenly, he saw the ghost. Slowly, slowly, he saw a small figure walk out of the barn and down the road toward the bridge. He stared as hard as he could. Was it really yes, it was really a ghost, a shadowy gray ghost in the light of the star. For a minute, Jimsy wanted to run back to bed and pull the covers over his head. Then he remembered what his father had said. It's silly to be afraid of something you've never seen. So, instead of hiding himself in bed, Jimsy decided then and there he would go and look at the ghost and see if he was afraid of it. It took several minutes to get into his clothes and his warm coat and his galoshes, for there was snow on the ground, but he managed. He slipped out the front door, and he was glad the big star was shining across the meadow and on the road, so he did not need a lantern from the barn. He ran as fast as he could down the road looking for the ghost. He couldn't see it. He couldn't see anybody or anything, just this snowy white road lit by the star. Now he was almost disappointed to be so near a ghost and then lose it. He stopped running and wondered whether he should just go home and back to bed. He wasn't afraid, oh no, but everything was so quiet, and beyond the edge of the light from the star was darkness. But Jimsy was quite a brave boy at heart, and he did not give up easily, so he soon began to walk again toward the bridge. It was a good thing he did, for now he saw the ghost again. He was sitting on the wall of the bridge, and it looked very small and tired and lonely. Suddenly, he was not afraid anymore. He began to walk briskly until he reached the bridge. Then he stopped and looked at the ghost. The light from the star was dim now, and the bridge was pretty far away from the house, and he couldn't see the ghost very well. He stepped nearer and nearer until he was quite close. Yes, there the ghost was, sitting on the stone wall of the bridge. Now, at this very minute, what should happen except a big sneeze? Jimsy had forgotten to put on his cap, and the cold wind was blowing around his ears and in his hair. At the sound of the sneeze, the ghost gave a start. "Why, Jimsy, what are you doing here at this time of night?" The voice was not the voice of a ghost, not at all. It was the voice of Mr. Higgins. The wind blew off the ghost's hat, and under it was the face of Mr. Higgins. "I wanted to see a ghost," Jimsy said, "and it's only you, Mr. Higgins. Isn't there any ghost? You shouldn't have said there was a ghost when it's only you, Mr. Higgins." "Well, now, Jimsy," Mr. Higgins said, "I'm ashamed I said there was a real ghost when it's only Timothy Stillwagon's memory that I walk with on Christmas Eve. I guess I wanted to believe that he walks with me every Christmas. Of course, he can't walk in his flesh and blood the way he used to, so I just made him into a ghost because even his ghost would be better than nothing at all, you know. Yes, I guess it's only a memory I walk with after all." "What's a memory, Mr. Higgins?" Mr. Higgins picked up his cap and pushed it down over his ears. "It's something or somebody you can never forget." "Like the gray poodle we had," Jimsy said. "He got sick and died when we were living in the city, but I don't forget him. His name was Buster. Is he a memory, Mr. Higgins?" "Sure he is," Mr. Higgins said. "The same as Timothy Stillwagon. We were friends all our lives, him and me. We went fishing together when we were little boys like you. We fished under this very bridge and caught catfish, took 'em home for supper. We grew up, got married, had other little boys like you, and then one day it was all over and only me left. Me and a memory. Timothy's not dead for me, Gypsy. Come Christmas Eve, I walk the road from the barn to the bridge, and he walks with me as if he was alive again. Call him a ghost or not. I see him this minute as he was alive because we were friends. As long as you remember somebody, he's still alive. In you, if nowhere else. Eh, Tim, old boy? Mr. Higgins turned his head and smiled, exactly as if Timothy's still wagon was sitting there on the wall beside him. Do you see him? Gypsy asked. I see him, Mr. Higgins said, but that's because I know how he looked. You can't see him because you don't know how he looked. You're not afraid? Of course not. Do you think I could be afraid of Timothy? I never was, nor am I now. As long as I live, we're the same friends we always were. But when you die, Mr. Higgins, Gypsy asked. Then you'll remember me come Christmas Eve, Mr. Higgins said. Seeing as we're getting to be such good friends already. Christmas Eve, it's a great time for remembering friends. Not just presents, you know, but thoughts, loving thoughts. I'll always remember you, Mr. Higgins. Good. I'd rather have that for Christmas than a barrel full of presents. He got up. That wall is sitting kind of cold under me, and you ought to be in bed. I'll take you back to the house. You understand what I've been talking about, Gypsy? Kind of, Gypsy said. It'll come clear to you one day, Mr. Higgins said. He took Gypsy's hand and they walked up the hill again in the steady light of the big star. And when they came to the house, Mr. Higgins said good night and Merry Christmas, and Gypsy said the same to him. Then Gypsy went upstairs and put on his pajamas. Just before he jumped into bed, he looked out the window and saw Mr. Higgins, very small and bent, walking down the road to the bridge. So now, Gypsy told himself, some Christmas Eve, when I'm as big as Daddy, maybe I'll look out this window and see the ghost of Mr. Higgins walking down that road. Only it won't be a ghost. It'll be my memory of Mr. Higgins. He climbed into bed and pulled up the covers. Tomorrow he would explain to his father and mother. Explain the Christmas ghost tomorrow. And suddenly, he was fast asleep. Now, I have a little jolly Christmas song to sing for you that I only discovered a few years ago. It's from the 40s, and I don't know why more people don't sing it, oh my gosh. But anyways. Little Jack Frost, get lost, get lost. Little Jack Frost, get lost. You don't do a thing but put a bite on my toes. Freeze up the ground and take the bloom from the rose. So little Jack Frost, go away, go away. And don't you come back another day. There's lots of cold feet, all the lovers complain. You turned off the heat down in Lover's Lane. The chill in the pub is all alone in the dark. So little Jack Frost, get lost, get lost. Little Jack Frost, get lost. And then finally, this is a small, as you can see, very small poem that I keep on my mantle always, and it's very Christmassy, and I really like it. It's called The Star Is by Candace Nutter. The star is not hydrogen lit by the primordial flame, spitting cosmic dust into the vacuum, but whirls of angel light, sparking shepherds' eyes to turn their gaze from wolf-fat sheep to Bethlehem.